the Republican Party is just completely MIA, like not fighting this, just AWOL. I've been posting like the Shia LaBeouf, like just do this meme. Like, what are you talking about? Why isn't anything happening?
Mark Mitchell, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
Doing well. We had some fun conversation before this thing, so I'm pretty stoked.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, I'm aware of you and your company and have been for quite a while. But I was really engaged by an episode that you did with Marty Bent, TFTC, I think is the podcast. I'll drop it in the description, where the two of you discussed an ongoing generational breakdown in the broader right wing in America. This is something that I think myself and many of my listeners will be aware of on any number of issues. But I'm curious, right? What sort of motivated you to look into this? And I guess I should be a podcaster and lead with this. If you could, where are you coming from, right? Why are you the person who can, speak about data like this?
Yeah, so I'm a political pollster, which is relatively commoditized, but I'm also like an honest, non-establishment pollster, which is not commoditized at all. There are actually very few of us. And the stuff I like to do best isn't really the political horse racing. It's hard. It's boring. I like polling on public sentiment, which is like, hey, 100 years ago, somebody said, well, do people like chocolate or vanilla ice cream better? And somebody said, oh, I don't know. We'll ask them. And then the news thought that was interesting. But now what I poll on is like Civil War, the death of the American dream, political violence, the weaponization of the justice system. And I find looking around that really nobody else is talking about those things. And that's because they've all been captured by a system that essentially wants to tell people what to think and not actually ask them. And that's why we wound up on the CIA's naughty list, and why, you're not allowed to ask questions about election integrity or vaccines or any of that stuff. And so luckily with Twitter and, we've been pretty loud and vocal anti-establishment voices, because I think we can all look around and say, this isn't red team, blue team anymore. Like, we're fundamentally not being represented in a way that feels like we're running towards a cliff.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of interesting. I had a conversation with a Gen X conservative, right? Very intelligent woman. But it was interesting to hear the conversation break down. Me and a couple friends were talking to her about the election of Zohran Mamdani. And she was very, very worried about this Islamic socialist that had taken over New York. And my peers were by no means, a fan of this guy for any number of reasons. But the concerns were entirely different. Like, the word socialism was sort of this like dim mock, right? The death touch. And look, I'm by no means a socialist at all, but it's interesting that that term, right, is sort of a disqualifying feature for your, political career. And when I say disqualifying, I mean, clearly it isn't for Mamdani. He will be in office, but that stink has sort of faded. And I think that that is an interesting signifier of something more broad, which is this kind of, you could call it almost like a civic religion. These sort of, moral precepts of what is and is not acceptable has fully and totally collapsed. And maybe it hit the right a little after it hit the left, but it is creating this sort of situation where it's almost impossible to talk across that divide for reasons like that. It's sort of this thought terminating word, like, oh, socialist, or, there are others, right, to attack people on the right. But it is this sort of interesting moment of fracture where the kind of previous political order, their terms no longer apply, if you see what I'm getting at, Mark.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, this is what is happening right now. There's a major political realignment. And nobody in Washington, D.C. really wants to acknowledge it. And things are starting to move really fast right now. And I'm here for it. As a public opinion professional, measuring sentiment on this is going to be wild, because what history tells us is that there's periods where opinions change really, really, really fast. And for people who don't study history, I certainly don't. There's a book called The Fourth Turning that was recommended to me by Steve Bannon, who actually 15 years ago wrote a movie about this, produced a movie. And he's very prescient on many things. And this was one of them, because when I read the book, I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then increasingly, just over the last year or two, I've seen more and more signs of this impending shift coming in my polling. And I think the most obvious example recently is people's opinions on Israel, but I could point to a ton of other examples too. And one of them, like referring to the Mamdani situation, is domestic versus foreign terrorism. And so it's like, okay, Islam's a religion, like whatever. There's a lot of religions, but then, okay, there's also this thing called Islamic terrorism. And so when you look at Mamdani, he's got a really high favorability rating with under 40 voters. Like the young people like him. The old people are like going, oh my God, socialism, that's terrible. And the young people don't care. They just don't. And the older people are saying, oh, but he's going to be a Muslim terrorist. And they're like, no, he's not. I listened to him. He sounds authentic to me. And in the polling, I forget the numbers. I think younger people are more concerned about domestic terrorism. I just posted it this morning. But essentially, they're like 40 points apart, younger people versus older people. Older people are overwhelmingly concerned with foreign terrorism because they've heard all this stuff, this, we got to fight them over there, neoconservatives, George W. Bush kind of stuff. And so what I think happens, and I think one of the things that's going on here too, is that people like to push values. And I think that when times get tough, values are pulled. And so people are saying like, no, those values you're pushing on me don't work anymore. A vacuum needs to be filled. I like this better. And I think we're seeing that. And the fourth turning tells us this is happening because the fourth turning crises that happen every 80 to 100 years are precipitated by a massive collapse in institutional trust because the old values mean nothing and have failed. And so increasingly, you're going to see these older boomer values because boomers mostly built the system we're living in. They're 60% of federal elected representatives. And that's going to flip really soon. And boomers are saying things like, again, we have to fight them over there instead of over here. Free market capitalism works. You just have to work harder. Israel's our greatest ally. We need NATO in order to fight against Russia. And increasingly, the youth are just going to rebel against that because it doesn't work anymore. Conservatism itself is kind of a failed set of luxury beliefs because what does it even conserve? Certainly not free market capitalism. And when you ask the under 40 voters, like, do you like capitalism or socialism? They say capitalism better. But then even the conservative under 40 voters, if you say, okay, well, how about this socialistic thing like wealth redistribution? Even the conservatives are like, oh, yeah, okay, we kind of need that right now. So there is a very straightforward, one-dimensional political axis, right versus left. It doesn't work anymore. Increasingly, we have the horseshoe of politics where right and far left are meeting towards focusing on the failed system that doesn't work for everybody anymore. And that's why you see things like J.D. Vance polling very well because he talks like economic populist, and he gets beaten by Bernie Sanders. And the way those two people talk on certain things are not very far apart. It all just comes down to like, well, how are we going to fix it? So I think that's really what's going to define politics over the next couple of years, which is increasingly people are rebelling against the people in power. And the youth are going to win. It's just a matter of time. If they're 15% of Congress right now, that's going to, and boomers are 60, that's going to get completely reversed in like 10 years.
Well, and that's sort of why, and there's all these different colorful ways to describe it. The one from 4chan, right, is the day of the pillow. But we are
Yep.
It's a bit grim, but it is sort of funny. We are about to reach, and depending on who you ask, it's either in 4 or 6 years. You probably know better than I, but the point at which we reach 50% baby boomer mortality. Now, obviously, the way mortality tables work, it goes quickly, right? Even in an era of, modern medicine, right? And I think that 80-year, you could have like fourth turning. I think a large part of it as well, and this is something I've seen both on the left and the right, is that there's a large number of people who don't have the buy-in necessary to assume the traditional conservative position of status quo defender. Because when you have young men who, for any number of reasons, there's been a piece out in Compact about this, but were, locked out, to traditional ways of accumulating money and status. And then also just due to, a combination of inflation and, high asset values, becomes very difficult to become a property holder, to have a stake in society, literally. Well, you're going to see people sort of throw up their hands and say, well, let's turn the table. Like, let's just set this back to zero. I stand proportionally a better chance. And I'm glad you mentioned domestic terror because, I've been kind of, I sort of came into my, political awareness during, the first Trump term when, left-wing political violence sort of reemerged. And so for effectively my entire adult life, you have seen this sort of worrying spiral of violence. The one that I always mention that no one ever talks about is those, 12 guys who set up an L-shaped ambush outside of an ICE facility. Where it's like, okay, they weren't successful. It's not like there was a huge body count. But you look at that and you're like, okay, well, that's 12 guys with some semblance of organization. That's way more than admittedly tragic cases where, some guy reads Catcher in the Rye and decides to go, take a scalp or something.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think that and I'm, maybe this is kind of left wing or, socialist messaging, as we could say, but when you have that sort of dispossession, when you have people who don't really have a lot to lose, they don't have a mortgage that would go unpaid if they're in jail, or a wife who would go, hungry. Well, those sort of drastic actions are incentivized, or at least less
100%.
disincentivized. And I think that that's one of those things that I feel very frustrated with talking to conservatives, because it's like, one, like, what happens now? Like, they shot one of your guys literally in 4K video. They tried to shoot Trump twice. Like, where do you think this goes? And if you don't provide those people, one, a sort of harsh deterrent, which has been lacking, and two, to be honest, something else to do, something constructive to do, like, where do you think this political violence goes? Because it doesn't just stop because you're upset about it.
No, it's coming. It's just a matter of how and who, I think, really, to be honest with you. And that's why I've been screaming louder and louder. I want to avoid this scenario. The fourth turning crises are almost always hot. There's almost always blood, Civil War, World War II, the Revolution, going back, probably some crap with the Indians and the French. I don't know. But the numbers say that this is coming. 43% of America thinks a Civil War revolution is coming in the next few years. It's a majority. I think the number was 56% of under 40 voters. That's not good. Number one concern right now in America is political violence. 90% of people are concerned about that. That's more than inflation. I mean, it's just sick. Over a majority of people thought that there was going to be a violent reaction to the 2024 election, including leftists who think it's more likely that the right is going to pop off because of the January 6th psychological operation that's never been healed. Like, where the hell is our Jan 6 commission? And I've been really outspoken about this because I think that the Republican Party is just completely MIA, like not fighting this, just AWOL. I've been posting like the Shia LaBeouf, like, just do this meme. Like, what are you talking about? Why isn't anything happening? And I think the under 40 voter also is most fixated on systematic reform. I've called it burn it down politics, and that sounds pretty inflammatory. Nice pun. But I mean, they want to replace a failed, unethical system with something that gets back to, in my opinion, core ethics of fairness and justice and honesty. And I think that's the key to the under 40, the Zoomer, and the millennial politics is they just want fairness. Like, why doesn't this system just work? They want a restoration of integrity. And like, that's a pretty strong body politic. You know what I mean? Like, if you're an objective thinker, it's pretty easy to look at any policy and say, like, no, that's stupid. We shouldn't be doing this transfer payment. No, we should get these people out of the country because it's not better objectively. We have stats. And even the ones on the left, like, kind of talk like that. And so the problem I see here is that, like, Trump captured the youth zeitgeist. He got literally shot, right? He got into power on retribution and building a golden age for America and draining the swamp. And he's literally delivered nothing on that. It's like he's the biggest person in America who forgot that he got shot. And I understand that there's limitations. I understand that it's tough to arrest these people and get it to stick. But I think the way, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Zoomers want people arrested. And when they were happiest with Trump, it was during the peak Doge. You could literally go to Google search trends and type in Doge. And when it peaked on the last week of February, go straight to RasmussenReports.com and look at Trump's under 40 approval rating. It was 60%. And so every Republican in DC should have been, like, morally bound to understand why they finally did something that wasn't, and why the youth vote actually like Republicans for once. And they didn't care. They shut Doge down. And this was the same week Donald Trump is quoting Napoleon Bonaparte. And I mean, I just have poll after poll after poll. First, that shows that life is terrible for the under 40 voters in a way that even you, like, I don't know if you want to get into or not, like, very much understated. The societal fabric is basically, the social contract's gone for the under 40. It's just gone. And I'm 45. I saw the whole thing fall apart. Like, I had my career stolen from me by the H-1B program that got passed into law in 1990. So this touches me too. But it's like, if you're in power and you were given a mandate, and that mandate is brutally reform the government because everybody needs it. They're begging you. Only 30% trust the federal government. And then the reality is, well, the system doesn't work. We're never going to get any of these people arrested. Like Comey's going to get off scot-free, and that was just one arrest. Then I kind of think that you have an ethical obligation to burn that system down, be an accelerationist, arrest all these people, get the evidence out, and then fine, they're going to escape. I mean, there's an aspect of the process is the punishment, but if our justice system is that gone, if the wealthy and strong and powerful people who rule us are unaccountable, why are we allowing this to persist?